expand our imagination.
Justification for being what it was.
Hello and welcome to Washington Unplugged. I'm Capitol Hill correspondent Nancy Cordes. We begin today with the push for sweeping financial reform. The president is going to New York this Thursday to make his case less than a week after the Securities and Exchange Commission announced its lawsuit against Goldman Sachs, which pits Wall Street's top regulator against its most storied bank. Goldman Sachs, which has first quarter profits that soared to over $3 billion in the first 3 months of 2010, is now going on the offensive, hiring Mr. Obama's former White House counsel, Gregory Craig. What's that going to do to reform? Well, Politico's Eamon Javers broke the story late last night, and he joins me now. Hi, Eamon. So explain this to us. Greg Craig gets hired by Goldman Sachs to do what exactly? Because there are rules, right, about what he can and can't do so soon after leaving the administration?
That's right. He's restricted by the administration's ethics policy, which he signed, to not contacting folks at the White House for 2 years. But he is allowed to talk to people up on Capitol Hill, and my understanding he has been doing that. There are congressional investigations into Goldman Sachs, as well as that SEC investigation, which resulted in charges last week. So there's a lot on Goldman's plate here in Washington, but I'm told that his real value to Goldman Sachs is that he really understands both the politics and the legal piece of the problems that Goldman is facing. And having somebody who can do both of those things is extremely helpful for Goldman. And of course, here's Goldman, which is known for hiring political insiders, doing that yet again with an ex-Obama administration official.
He can also advise them on strategy, right? Because you report that Goldman Sachs is having to tread very carefully here as it tries to figure out its PR response to all of this. It doesn't want to come across as too aggressive or too arrogant, and yet at the same time, it's trying to portray itself as pro-reform.
Yeah, that's right. But at the same time they're doing that, they're saying, we're going to fight this SEC case. They really feel like it doesn't have any merit. And remember, this is an investment bank that was sort of one of the most storied names on Wall Street, sort of the ultimate high watermark for quality in investment banking for years and years. Now they're sort of known as the giant vampire squid, according to Rolling Stone. And they've really become the bank that everybody in Washington loves to hate. So they've got a real political problem and a PR problem on their hands. Greg Craig just knows this town backward and forward, and he knows Democrats backward and forward, and Democrats are in power on both ends of Pennsylvania Avenue. That's going to be a real asset for them.
Right. Now, there's still a lot of talk, as you know, about the timing of this fraud case being announced on the eve of the president's trip to New York to sell Wall Street on financial reform, right when the Democrats are coming out to make their big push. What have you been able to learn about that?
Well, the White House and the SEC say there was no coordination. In fact, any coordination between the two would have been improper and unethical. But, there are Republicans who are real skeptics on this. And I talked to a few of them yesterday who said, I just don't buy it. It's just simply too convenient. Whether there was any coordination or not, the folks over at the SEC certainly know that charges against Goldman Sachs of all firms would help Barack Obama, as they have done. It's really put some Republicans who are wavering on the real hot seat here. There are at least 8 by our count at Politico, Republicans who might vote for this thing at the end of the day, maybe more. So all of those folks are really sweating it out now that they don't want to be seen in an election year as voting for Wall Street.
Right. It's a tough position for them to be in. Another question about Goldman. It's been such a huge donor to Democrats over the past decade or so. The company and its employees contributed, I think it's almost $1 million to President Obama's campaign. Is that all going to change now?
I don't think so. I mean, firms are kind of tactical about this. I mean, they contribute to Democrats, but they also contribute to Republicans, and they sort of lean one way or the other based on who's in power in a given year or who's likely to win the next election. Goldman Sachs is going to continue to be a powerful political player. They have always seen, the use in having their former alumni going into politics. We saw Hank Paulson, President George Bush's Treasury Secretary. He was the former CEO of Goldman Sachs. So clearly they've been playing both the Republican side and the Democratic side of the politics game in Washington for a long time.
Right. Some have called it a revolving door. All right. Eamon Javers at Politico, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hey, thank you.
Turning now to the upcoming congressional vote on the Employment Non-Discrimination Act, which would protect employees on the basis of sexual orientation or gender identity, including transgender and transsexual teachers. Supporters and opponents are getting ready for what will most likely be a polarizing debate. And so joining me to discuss it are Allyson, Associate Director of Diversity for the Human Rights Campaign, and Andrea Lafferty. She's Executive Director of the Traditional Values Coalition. Thank you so much, both of you, for joining us today.
Thanks, Nancy.
So, Allyson, let's start off with you. Explain to us exactly what ENDA does and why you think it's important.
Well, most Americans don't realize that in 29 states in this country, it's perfectly legal to fire someone for being gay just because you don't like gay people. In 38 states, perfectly legal to fire someone for being transgender just because you don't like transgender people. What ENDA does is it takes what a majority of Americans do recognize as a fundamental value of fairness in the workplace. We judge people on the basis of the work that they perform and not on the basis of how they look or what they do outside of work. And it applies that standard to federal law.
And where does the legislation stand right now?
Well, currently, ENDA in the House of Representatives has 199 co-sponsors. That's 199 members of the House who have put their name on the line as supporting this piece of legislation, recognizing that their constituents support it as well. And it is currently on its way, probably out of committee within the next couple of weeks, into a full vote on the House floor.
Andrea, you have said that having transgendered teachers in the classroom would put children in harm's way. Why do you say that?
Well, I think, first of all, the timeline's been pushed back. Barney Frank has promised to vote either tomorrow or the following Wednesday. I don't think it's going to happen because members don't want to have to walk the plank. Many members of Congress don't understand that this bill will override the law in 38 states, and it will make it so that a school district and a local school will be unable to make hiring decisions regarding transgender teachers. If an individual comes and says to the principal, I am a man, I'm going to become a woman by next year, the teacher cannot be reassigned out of the classroom. That would be illegal.
Why do you think they should be
We
reassigned?
believe that children need a safe environment in which to learn. And the bottom line is the APA says people with gender identity
You're talking
disorder.
about the American Psychological
The American
Association?
Psychiatric Association says that gender identity is a mental disorder. Why are we giving our school children over to people with a serious mental disorder?
Well, first off, I've got to say, I find that profoundly offensive.
Well, I'm sorry if you do, but the bottom line is you have been diagnosed with a mental disorder. And so this is
I think that goes to show that you don't really understand psychology.
I'm here with a person who was born a man who identifies now as a woman, and that will be very confusing to children.
What about my children, Andrea?
Well, your
my children are not
very
confused.
But we're talking
my
about
children know what their
the
gender is,
majority
and they know what
American
mine
children.
is.
And I think once again, Speaker Pelosi is going to ask these conservative Democrats to walk the plank on a highly controversial issue, putting transgender teachers in the classroom. And then, of course, the effect it will have on businesses, Christian businesses. But again, we're focusing right now on the fact of how children will be affected.
How do you think children would be affected?
Well, I'm a parent. I have 4 children between the ages of 5 and 11. I live in a neighborhood that's full of children, and I can tell you that my neighbors are not afraid to have my children play with theirs. They're not afraid to send their children to my home for my wife to tutor them, for them to spend the night, to play with my kids. We talk about 38 states not having these protections, but the fact remains that there are 12 states where these protections exist. And there has been no epidemic of, children coming out of those public school environments profoundly harmed, gender confused.
In California, there was a situation, one case, an example, where the music teacher transitioned, and so the parents didn't know about it. The parents pulled their kids out of the class. Many of the children were confused.
Oh, no, wait. But you said the parents couldn't pull their kids out of class, but they did?
In different cases, sometimes they're able to pull their kids out, and sometimes they aren't.
So you said it would make that illegal.
No, it makes it illegal for the teacher, for the school to remove the teacher, because by removing the teacher from the classroom, it will be illegal. The federal government is coming in and telling Virginia, the Carolinas, and the list goes on, that we're going to override your law and we're going to tell you what to do in the classroom with teachers. And the American people don't know what's going on with this bill, but we are at Traditional Values are making sure that they do. We're educating members of Congress. We know now that the leadership in the Congress does not want a lot of debate on this, because they know if the light is shown on this, they lose.
Allyson, is there any room, do you think, for common ground between, your two groups? I mean, do you think that there is a way to legislate fair practices in the classroom that would set up, for example, a way to explain to children
what is
curriculum
changes? The
I think
curriculum changes too.
Directed that question to me, Andrea, and I'll tell you this. In 1960, when New Orleans schools were desegregated, there was an organization of mostly white women that called themselves Save Our Schools. They marched in front of public schools. They pulled out every scare tactic in the book. They had signs with Bible quotes on them. They had signs equating desegregation with communism. They spit on children and teachers, and they yelled racial slurs at them. That was discrimination in 1960. It's discrimination today. These are the same tactics. You stand in that tradition.
Comparing a mental disorder with how someone is born African American or Hispanic, I know is offensive to the African Americans that our organization represents. It's highly offensive to compare that, to say that a mental disorder is the same.
Well, do you see any room for common ground on this issue? So do you think
we would have no problem with people with a serious mental disorder receiving help, but to give them an elevated status within civil rights, within law, is very different. The school is about kids. It's not about someone's personal issues or agenda. Children need a safe environment, a secure environment, and a stable environment. And to introduce a man who's become a woman is very confusing to children.
Nancy, isn't that something that they will encounter in society regardless?
Perhaps. Maybe, maybe not. But isn't it also, why is it the decision of a small number of people to push this on the children of this country?
Well, once again, there's a majority of Americans who support these protections.
Oh, not a majority. We'll see. We'll see. If gay marriage doesn't pass, even in California, how would transgender teachers in the classroom pass? I don't think so.
And you say a majority of Americans support this based on?
A majority of Americans support the fact that not discriminating against lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender people is a fundamental American value, that people should be judged in the workplace on the basis of one thing, and that's whether or not they can do their job. Miss Lafferty's organization is offending in so many ways, but what about all of those transgender teachers that you're talking about? I mean, first off, how many of them are there? We, by our counts, less than half a dozen in the last 10 years.
But we have to have some real discussions. What we know from the gay and the transgender community is that most individuals that have so-called sex changes actually don't physically change their sex. So we know that they're female from the waist up and male from the waist down. That is very confusing to children.
Do children see them from the waist
down?
Well,
and that's part of the debate about, and even Barney Frank has said, you can't expose yourself. I personally had this happen to me with my mother and my small child in a pool in the city of Alexandria, Virginia, where transgenders came into the bathroom. And that is a part of the discussion with this bill. And they know when they bring in the bathrooms, they may change the language, but children are going to ask questions. Children understand boys and girls are different. It just adds a whole element of confusion that's unnecessary. Would we bring in other people with a serious mental disorder to teach our children?
If you take the transgender piece out of it, where do you stand on sexual discrimination against gays and lesbians?
But you can't. See, you can't do that because there is a commitment by the gay and transgender community and the leadership of this Congress that it will be a package. So we can only discuss ENDA in relationship to gender identity remaining in the bill, because that is the reality of what we're talking about.
And obviously this bill would have to pass not just the House but the Senate as well.
Yeah.
It passed the House a couple of years ago. The Senate didn't take it up, so what we'll be watching now is whether it does make it out of committee in both the House and the Senate, which have very packed agendas right now, and actually eventually make it to the floor of both houses of Congress before it could be made into law. Andrea and Allyson, I want to thank you both so much for coming in to discuss this. I know it's a tough topic. Andrea Lafferty of the Traditional Values Coalition and Allyson Robinson of the Human Rights Campaign. Thank you both so much for joining me today. I really appreciate it. And finally, protesters armed with handguns on their hips and rifles dangling from their shoulders gathered at Virginia's Gravelly Point Park on Monday, protesting what they say is a dangerous intrusion on their Second Amendment rights. Our Fernando Suarez was at the rally. Take a look.
Armed with machine guns, rifles, and holstered handguns, dozens of gun supporters protested just across the river from the nation's capital over fears that they're slowly losing their constitutional rights.
And all it is Americans standing up and saying, we're taking our rights back.
Don Seifert drove from Georgia to attend what organizers are calling the first armed rally at a national park since a law was passed allowing people to carry guns there.
You know, most people, as you've seen here, I mean, we have weapons all over the place, and you don't have people running around shooting at each other. It is part of the American way of life.
Despite what some might view as excess artillery, Seifert says the rally isn't about guns. It's about the Constitution.
You know, the guns are secondary. The guns are just part of the Bill of Rights, just like your free speech. You're sitting here, you know, talking to me right now using your free speech. I just decided to use more of my rights today. Rights that Justin Coleman, a computer programmer from Columbia, South Carolina, also supports.
Well, guns are guaranteed by the Constitution. What the Second Amendment says is the right of the people to keep and bear arms shall not be infringed. That it's not a confusing statement. There's nothing tricky legal language about it. It's just a plain and simple statement of fact.
What does make it tricky, though, is that gun laws and open carry laws vary from state to state, which is why this rally is taking place miles away in Virginia and not in front of the Capitol, because carrying guns in the District of Columbia is illegal.
We are here as responsible citizens. We are here as taxpayers and voters, and we want the government to get back to the Constitution. We want them to stop arrogating powers to themselves that are not granted to them by the people or by the states.
As for Don Seifert, the solution is quite simple.
You know, a armed society is a polite society. You know, it's an old cliche, but it's absolutely true.
Despite the fact that there were more weapons than people at the rally, there was no violence and there were no incidents with law enforcement. I can't tell you that the other big issue that came up over and over again, the president's health care plan. The crowd was very much against it, echoing some of the same sentiments we heard at last week's Tea Party rallies. Nancy?
Fernando Suarez, thank you. And that'll be it for Washington Unplugged today. Join us again tomorrow on CBSNews.com. I'm Capitol Hill correspondent Nancy Cordes. Thanks for joining us and have a great day.
Expand our imagination.
Justification for being what you